Every checkpoint within 50 miles of Bordeaux had orders to capture Robert de la Rochefoucauld, France's most wanted saboteur. He'd just blown up a Nazi munitions factory and escaped from prison by eliminating 3 guards with his bare hands. Before that, he'd stolen a Gestapo limousine at gunpoint after leaping from a firing squad truck. But this time was different. The Gestapo knew his face, his name, and his background. Roadblocks choked every route out of the city. German patrols swept every street and checked every car. There was no way out. This time, he was truly caged. Robert stared at the black and white clothes his contact sister had left on a chair, a Catholic nun's habit. He smiled to himself, because who would think to stop a nun? Robert de la Rochefoucauld was just 15 years old when he met his hero, Adolf Hitler. Born to French aristocracy, he and his family lived literally in the shadow of the Eiffel Tower. His life was as privileged as it could be. Private schooling in Switzerland and Austria. In 1938, his class visited Adolf Hitler's mountaintop retreat at Berchtesgaden. When the Führer's motorcade arrived, young Robert stood close enough that Hitler himself stepped forward and gently patted him on the cheek, an encounter the teenager remembered as a dream come true at the time. At the moment, he regarded Hitler as a great statesman. He and his schoolmates even adorned their bicycles with swastika flags in admiration. That youthful awe evaporated once war engulfed Europe. In May 1940, Nazi Germany invaded France, shattering La Rochefoucauld's world. His father, a nobleman with connections to the anti-Nazi Free French, was seized as a prisoner of war. Robert, his mother, and his 9 siblings fled Paris for their country estate, only to learn that not even the old nobility was safe under German occupation. Before long, a local postman quietly warned Robert that he had intercepted a letter denouncing the young aristocrat of the Gestapo. The Nazis were coming for him next. La Rochefoucauld's outrage at the occupiers turned to resolve. He had to escape France and fight back. By the spring of 1942, 18-year-old Robert made contact with the French resistance and committed to joining the struggle against Hitler. Under the alias René Lallier, he slipped out of occupied territory and headed south. Guided by resistance, he traveled via Vichy, France, down to the Pyrenees, then trekked over the mountains into Spain, alongside 2 downed British RAF pilots. Crossing into Spain was supposed to be the first step toward reaching the Free French forces in England. Instead, upon crossing the border, the trio was immediately arrested by General Franco's authorities and thrown into a Spanish internment camp for 2 months. Rochefoucauld endured 2 harrowing months of captivity in Spain, forced to pretend he was a fallen British airman. Identification as French would have meant immediate deportation back to France. This peculiar 3rd pilot was finally secured for release alongside the RAF pilots when British authorities intervened diplomatically. Safe on neutral ground, Robert was whisked to the embassy, where British officers saw him with curiosity and presented him with a surprising proposition. Rather than simply joining General Charles de Gaulle's Free French forces, they asked him to become a British secret agent. The British had been very impressed by the audacity and ingenuity he'd shown in reaching Spain. A highly educated aristocrat who spoke French and English and could pass as a British airman while escaping from Nazi-occupied France. What was not to like? They saw in him the perfect recruit for a new clandestine warfare unit Winston Churchill had formed in 1940, the Special Operations Executive, or SOE, whose mission was, as Churchill famously ordered, to, quote, set Europe ablaze by sabotage behind enemy lines. Robert accepted the challenge wholeheartedly. Before leaving Spain, he had the chance to consult with General de Gaulle himself, seeking the Free French leader's blessing to serve under British command. De Gaulle emphatically approved. He told La Rochefoucauld, quote, do it. Even allied to the devil, it's for La France. With both French and British approval, Robert de la Rochefoucauld officially joined Churchill's secret army of saboteurs. The British ambassador in Spain even joked with him about the decision, quipping that Britain's spies had unparalleled courage and skill, but, quote, it's just that their French accents are appalling. In Robert, the SOE gained a fluent Frenchman who could move in occupied France without arousing the suspicion that tripped up so many British agents. In early 1943, La Rochefoucauld was secretly ferried across to England to begin training as a covert operative. He arrived as one of the youngest recruits in the SOE, brimming with determination to strike back at the Nazis. Over the next several months, British instructors put him through a grueling crash course in clandestine warfare. At RAF Ringway, near Manchester, he learned to parachute from low-flying planes, handle guns and explosives, and take down a man in seconds with nothing but his bare hands. Hardened criminals were even pulled out of prison to teach the finer points of cracking safes and picking locks. The training molded him into a lethal saboteur, prepared for the most dangerous missions. By June 1943, at just 19 years old, he was deemed ready to be dropped back into Nazi-occupied France. In June 1943, after months of preparation, Rochefoucauld was flown back into occupied France under cover of darkness. He and 2 British comrades were dropped by parachute into the rugged Morvan region, tasked with sabotaging Nazi infrastructure deep behind enemy lines. Robert quickly linked up with a band of French Maquis guerrillas led by a grizzled fighter who called himself the Pope. Operating near the town of Avignon, the team set to work, wreaking havoc on German supply lines. La Rochefoucauld personally helped demolish an electrical substation powering the local rail network, and he planted explosive charges that blew apart key railroad tracks in the area. The resulting disruption to Nazi trains was exactly what London had hoped for, and the 19-year-old saboteur accomplished it brilliantly on his very first mission. His success, however, was short-lived. As Robert waited in hiding for an RAF aircraft to retrieve him, a local collaborator betrayed him to the Germans. Gestapo agents swarmed in to arrest the young operative, likely tipped off by someone in the vicinity after the explosions. Rochefoucauld was captured and subjected to harsh interrogations by the Nazis, who wanted to know everything about the resistance networks and British spies. Despite whatever torture or pressure he endured, Robert refused to talk. Frustrated, the German authorities quickly ordered the execution of the terrorist. Barely out of his teens, Rochefoucauld now faced a firing squad. Under heavy guard, he was loaded onto a military truck for transport to the nearby city of Auxerre, where his sentence was to be carried out without delay. As the German truck rumbled toward Auxerre, Rochefoucauld understood he had nothing to lose. With adrenaline surging, Robert suddenly sprang up and hurled himself off the moving truck, catching his captors completely off guard. He hit the ground running as the astonished German soldiers fumbled to raise their rifles. Gunshots cracked through the air, bullets whizzing past him, but none found their mark. The 19-year-old sprinted for his life down the streets of Auxerre, evading the wild shots in a desperate sprint for freedom. After several frantic blocks, Rochefoucauld rounded a corner and came face to face with an improbable sight. A stately black limousine idling outside the local Gestapo headquarters, marked with swastika flags. Its driver was standing aside, distracted, and crucially, he'd left the engine running and the keys in the ignition. Seizing the once-in-a-million opportunity, Robert leapt into the driver's seat of the Nazi staff car and hit the gas. The powerful limousine peeled away from the curb, and within seconds, he was speeding out of town on the Route Nationale. German road patrols, alerted to the prisoner's escape, tried to stop the speeding car, but Rochefoucauld smashed straight through a military roadblock before the occupiers could react. He didn't stop until he was well clear of Auxerre. That night, Robert ditched the stolen car on a rural roadside and continued on foot through fields and woods. Exhausted and still wearing prison clothes, he eventually knocked on the door of a small-town grocer whom he hoped might sympathize. The French shopkeeper not only gave him shelter, but also put him in touch with local resistance members willing to assist the fugitive saboteur. Thanks to these allies, Rochefoucauld managed to slip onto a train heading for Paris, just one step ahead of German search parties combing the area. During the journey, he hid under a washroom sink whenever troops came aboard, his heart pounding at every inspection. But the disguise and luck held. After hours of tense travel, Robert stepped off the train in Paris and melted into the crowd of the capital. As he later put it, quote, "When we arrived in Paris, I felt drunk with freedom." Upon reaching Paris in late 1943, Rochefoucauld had effectively cheated death, but he was far from safe. The Gestapo knew his name and face, so British intelligence quickly arranged to extract him from France before the Nazis could close in. After hiding with relatives in Paris and regaining his strength for a few weeks, Robert received secret instructions in February 1944. He was to slip up to the Calais coast for a rendezvous with a British submarine. Braving the heavily patrolled shoreline, he met the sub offshore near Berck and was taken aboard for the perilous voyage back to England. The underwater escape proved nearly as harrowing as his leap from the firing squad truck. At one point, a German anti-submarine patrol bombarded the area with depth charges, and the submarine's hull shook with explosions as Rochefoucauld huddled inside. He later admitted about those tense days beneath the sea, quote, "I've never been so scared in my life." Nevertheless, he made it home to Britain alive. By the spring of 1944, Robert was back in London and astonished to find the city brimming with optimism. After years of wartime austerity, the mood was almost celebratory as Allied victory began to appear inevitable. He would write about those days, quote, "We were invited to the best houses. Girls fell into our arms. For a 20-year-old Parisian count, London offered tempting comforts. But Rochefoucauld did not intend to sit out the rest of the war in safety. He immediately volunteered for another mission to France, even more ambitious and dangerous than the last. British planners gave him his next target, a massive munitions factory at Saint-Médard-d'Angers, just outside Bordeaux. This huge industrial complex produced vital ammunition for the German army, and disrupting it would aid the impending Allied invasion of France. Churchill's Ministry of Ungentlemanly Warfare wanted Rochefoucauld to set it ablaze from within. In May 1944, only weeks before D-Day, Robert parachuted back into occupied France once more, codenamed Sun, leading a daring operation to infiltrate and destroy the Nazi arms plant. Posing as just another French workman, Rochefoucauld slipped into the sprawling Saint-Médard-d'Angers munitions complex outside Bordeaux. The facility was enormous, more than a square mile of factories and barracks, with some 5,500 laborers toiling to supply Hitler's armies. Destroying it outright was impossible, but Robert aimed to cripple its most vital components. For 4 nerve-wracking days, he infiltrated the plant under the noses of German guards, gradually smuggling in about 40 kilograms of high explosives. His methods were ingenious. He hid bricks of plastic explosive inside hollowed-out loaves of bread that he carried as if they were his daily lunch, and even in the soles of specially made work boots. Little by little, the young saboteur assembled a bomb from pieces, placing charges at strategic points around the factory's infrastructure. By May 20th, 1944, everything was in place. That afternoon, Rochefoucauld set his timers and calmly walked out of the munitions plant, blending into the stream of workers ending their shift. Minutes later, a chain of thunderous explosions ripped through Saint-Médard-d'Angers. The blasts were so powerful that they were heard miles away across the French countryside. Inside the compound, flames and black smoke engulfed warehouses full of munitions. Robert had to sprint and then bike away furiously to escape the conflagration he'd caused, pedaling off on a stolen bicycle as German alarms blared behind him. Only once he was safe did he stop to catch his breath and marvel at the devastation he'd unleashed. That night, he transmitted a triumphant coded message to London confirming the factory's destruction. The reply from SOE headquarters was a single, satisfied word, quote, "Félicitations," congratulations. Overjoyed, Rochefoucauld rendezvoused with a local resistance leader to celebrate the mission's success. They shared several bottles of good French wine in exuberant relief, and Robert admitted he drank a bit too much in his moment of victory. He awoke the next morning with a pounding hangover, but the Bordeaux munitions works lay in ruins. The operation was a resounding success, dealing a significant blow to the German war machine on the eve of D-Day. The celebration was short-lived. Only days after the Bordeaux factory blast, as he cycled along a country road, he blundered into a German checkpoint. It was past curfew, and the occupying troops were on high alert. Robert tried to bluff his way through. He even claimed he was just returning from a romantic encounter, but the Germans arrested him on the spot. The saboteur was hauled to Fort Douai, a grim 16th-century fortress-turned-prison in Bordeaux, and slated for execution as soon as the Nazis confirmed his identity. Locked in a cell once again, awaiting the end, the ever-resourceful Rochefoucauld weighed his options. He even considered biting down on the cyanide pill, hidden in the heel of his shoe, to avoid another firing squad, but the fearless young man decided to gamble on one more daring escape. Under the guise of a medical emergency, Robert launched into a violent fake seizure, foaming at the mouth and contorting his body on the cell floor. The panicked guard fell for the ruse and unlocked the door to restrain the convulsing prisoner. In that instant, Rochefoucauld exploded into action. He snatched up a heavy wooden table leg and smashed it against the guard's skull, then delivered a fatal blow that snapped the man's neck. He would say of the lethal hand-to-hand skills, quote, "Thank goodness for that pitilessly efficient training." Moving quickly, Robert stripped off the guard's uniform and sidearm and put them on himself. Disguised in German Feldgendarmerie attire, he strode down the corridor and into the guard room. The sentries there barely had time to register that something was amiss before Rochefoucauld drew the stolen pistol and shot them both. In the blink of an eye, the fearless saboteur had neutralized his captors. He simply walked out of Fort Douai into the midnight streets, impersonating a German soldier well enough to slip away into the dark. Outside, Bordeaux remained in lockdown as German patrols scoured the city for the factory's saboteur. Rochefoucauld hurried through back alleys to the safe address he'd memorized. There, a resistance contact sheltered him for a short time, but evacuating him from Bordeaux amid the massive manhunt proved impossible. Roadblocks and patrols choked every route. As the net tightened, Robert and his local allies devised a bold yet bizarre escape plan. The contact's sister was a Catholic nun, and she provided one of her spare habits for Robert to wear. The next morning, the 6-foot-tall French commando, dressed in a nun's robe and wimple. With head bowed and pace measured, he walked right down the main road out of Bordeaux in broad daylight. German soldiers glanced at the black and white figure and saw only a member of an unassuming religious order. The disguise worked perfectly. Rochefoucauld managed to travel dozens of miles on foot, passing checkpoint after checkpoint in plain sight without drawing a second look from the enemy. Eventually, he reached the secret rendezvous point, the home of Roger Lance, SOE codename Aristide, a British agent in charge of resistance operations in the region. Lance was astonished at the manner of Robert's arrival, but he took him in gratefully. By now, it was early June 1944, and the long-awaited Allied D-Day invasion of France was about to begin. Every underground group and Allied agent was focused on supporting the Normandy landings. London informed Lance that extracting Rochefoucauld was not a priority at the moment. In fact, Robert later quipped that with the invasion underway, he was, quote, the last of the worries in London. Instead of an exfiltration, Aristide received orders to keep the young saboteur hidden until things cooled down. For the time being, Robert de la Rochefoucauld would have to survive on his own in occupied France, with the Gestapo still hunting him relentlessly. True to form, Rochefoucauld did not stay in hiding for long. After his escape from Bordeaux, the SOE arranged for him to lie low with a friendly woodcutter in the forest of southwest France. But manual labor and inaction did not suit Robert. Restless and eager to keep fighting, he soon left his safe house and linked up with the roving Maquis resistance group operating in the region. Throughout the summer of 1944, as Allied forces pushed inland from Normandy, Rochefoucauld took part in guerrilla operations to harass the retreating Germans. He led sabotage raids, ambushes, and intelligence missions, doing whatever he could to aid the liberating armies from behind enemy lines. Even as the Germans were being driven out of France, danger still dogged Rochefoucauld. In one close call, he was again captured by an enemy patrol, this time by SS troops, and hauled to a military outpost for execution. The Nazis had learned from his prior escapes and meant to shoot him immediately. Robert was lined up in a field at gunpoint, certain that this time his luck had run out. But fate intervened dramatically. Just as the firing squad raised their rifles, a sudden burst of gunfire erupted from the tree line. It was a band of his fellow resistance launching a surprise rescue. In the chaos, Rochefoucauld threw himself to the ground and scrambled away to safety as his comrades covered him. He emerged miraculously unscathed, thinking, quote, I had what I needed more than anything else, luck. By late August 1944, German forces had abandoned Bordeaux, and southwestern France was finally liberated. As the tricolor flag flew again in Bordeaux, Robert observed a curious sight. Suddenly, the cafes filled with men proudly wearing French uniforms and resistance armbands, many of whom had kept a low profile during the occupation. He later said, quote, it seemed the heroes were two a penny, now that the danger had passed. The ostentation made me feel sick. After all he had been through, Robert had little patience for armchair patriots who claimed glory without risking their lives. He pushed ahead, joining an organized unit of resistance, codenamed Charlie, that continued to fight pockets of German holdouts in France. In one almost comical incident during these final campaigns, Robert stepped onto a dark building, only to come face to face with a startled German soldier doing the same. Both men reflexively fired their pistols at point-blank range, and both somehow missed. In the eerie pause that followed, each man turned and ran back the way he came, a moment that Rochefoucauld later recounted as a farcical illustration of war's absurdity. Yet the war was not over for Robert de la Rochefoucauld. A few isolated clusters of die-hard German forces still held out along the French Atlantic coast into early 1945, and Robert soon volunteered for one more high-stakes mission to help finish them off. In April 1945, with World War II's end in sight, Rochefoucauld undertook one last commando operation. Although France was largely liberated, a pocket of die-hard German forces still held out, fortifying the Gironde estuary north of Bordeaux. Robert volunteered to lead a small team to eliminate a formidable German casemate near the village of Saint-Vivien-de-Médoc. This coastal fort bristled with heavy guns that had to be neutralized before the Allies could advance. Under cover of darkness, Rochefoucauld and 3 fellow commandos paddled a rubber dinghy silently down the Gironde River, approaching the enemy stronghold from the sea. It was a moonless, bitterly cold night, and the surf was choppy as the French saboteur guided his men ashore just below the looming bunker walls. Stealth was paramount. The casemate was protected by an outer sentry wall draped in camouflage netting and patrolled by armed guards. Rochefoucauld, ever bold, decided to go first. He climbed the slick outer wall hand over hand, using the netting for grip. Reaching the top, he peered into the darkness below and spotted a lone German sentry making his rounds between the wall and the main bunker. Timing his move, Robert waited until the guard passed directly underneath. Then the saboteur dropped from the wall like a panther. He landed on the unsuspecting German and dispatched him in silence. With the outer perimeter breached, Rochefoucauld signaled his men to hand up the explosive charges. Moving swiftly, they planted plastic explosives at the bunker's base and along its gun casemates. Robert set the timers for a few minutes, and the team quietly withdrew to their inflatable boat. They were paddling frantically into the Black River current when a thunderous explosion tore apart the night behind them. The charges detonated inside the casemate, shattering its concrete and knocking the big guns out of action. Come dawn, Allied troops advanced on the position with little resistance. The Germans, stunned by the midnight blast, had already pulled back to their final redoubt at Bordeaux on the coast. Rochefoucauld's final sabotage mission was a success. The man who had once worshipped Hitler as a hero had now done his part in ending his reign of terror. In the operation's aftermath, however, Robert himself became a casualty of the waning days of the war. On April 19, 1945, just weeks before Germany's surrender, he was scouting a freshly captured area when he stepped on a hidden landmine. The explosion mangled his knee and put the battle-worn saboteur in the hospital for over a month. While he recuperated from surgery, the war in Europe officially ended on May 8, 1945. Rochefoucauld had risked life and limb right up to the very end. Although he regretted not standing on the front lines for VE Day, he had the satisfaction of knowing that his clandestine actions had directly hastened France's liberation. After the war, the French government and its British allies honored him with their highest decorations. He was made a Chevalier of the Légion d'honneur and awarded the Croix de Guerre and the Médaille de la Résistance in France, as well as Britain's prestigious Distinguished Service Order and Distinguished Conduct Medal for his ungentlemanly valor behind enemy lines. He continued to serve in uniform for a few more years, joining France's elite forces in the post-war period. He saw action in the First Indochina War, leading commando raids against the Viet Minh. In 1956, he parachuted into Egypt during the Suez Crisis, ready for another fight. But the conflict ended before his unit engaged the enemy. Eventually, Rochefoucauld hung up his guns and settled into civilian life. Fittingly, Robert de la Rochefoucauld passed away on May 8, 2012, Victory in Europe Day, exactly 67 years after the war ended. He was 88 years old.